This conference will now be recorded.
So today we are starting with one of the framework which is related to UI, LWC, Light Web Components. So nowadays this framework is latest to develop the UI to match the UI components specific to the Lightning experience. We use Lightning Web Components. So already we have Aura components. So why Salesforce introduced LWC in 2019? So first we need to understand that difference. Later we just jump into the technical part quickly. Okay. So this difference to know. So I'm just opening my website. So first we should know how exactly LWC is better when compared to the existing framework called Aura. Aura or Lightning components. Okay, so people call Lightning components. People also call Aura. So when compared to that, how LWC is better? Okay, the main important thing is the web stack. The web stack is nothing but the UI related framework supported by the browsers. So there is a company called W3C. Yes, so W3C is one of the organization. So this organization defines the web standards. So all the browser companies they registered with the W3C organization. So this organization, whatever the standards they define, all the browser companies they follow those standards and provide the features by default. So as soon as we have the latest browser, by default the browser, so whatever supports, so that we call as web stack. Okay, so in 2014, when Salesforce introduced Aura, Aura was introduced in 2014. So that time the web stack supported by the browsers by default, the features, the most of the features were not supported by default as part of the web stack. If you see this 2014 web stack, so in orange color, whatever you are seeing, so those are supported that time. But whatever you are seeing in the green color, so those are not supported. Since those are not supported, Salesforce they came up with a framework called Aura. Through Aura framework, in this green color, whatever you are seeing, all these features were delivered. Okay, so that means whenever you try to render, whenever we try to see the result of the Aura component, internally it downloads the framework file, which includes all these features. On top of that, all the Aura components and applications will run. Okay, so but in 2019, the web stack, the browsers, whatever natively supported features, those are increased. Almost all the modern features are supported from 2019 by all the browsers. To take the advantage of that and to reduce the framework instead of depending heavily on the custom framework. So whatever natively available in the browsers, on top of that, if you do the development, the performance of our UI components will be more better. So that's the reason to take the advantage of the modern framework web stack features. Salesforce they came up with Lightning Web Components, LWC, so Lightning Web Components. Based on the 2019 web stack, Salesforce introduced this LWC components. If you see in the orange color, so all these are not there in the framework. All these are natively supported by browsers. Salesforce is also relying on the default web stack supported by the browsers. So on top of that, some of the specialized services, maybe without writing any FX code to interact with the database of Salesforce, Lightning data services. And also there are many standard components provided by Salesforce. It's not that for each and every requirement we are going to create a custom component. Salesforce is offering many standard components, and also security to deal with the data security. So for all those things, they have a thin framework, right? When compared to 2014, if you see now whatever the framework used to run the LWC components is very, very thin. Due to that reason, the performance of the UI components will be more. So that's the reason. So Salesforce came up with LWC, and going forward, any new requirement so will be developed using Lightning Web Components. Maybe if the client is having many existing screens already developed with Visual Force or Aura, so that time we work with Visual Force and Aura and enhance. But if the client is having any new requirement, so people are recommending to use Lightning Web Components. So this will be the future. Yeah, so just to understand that point. So, and also before we start, small things we should know. Maybe here when I open, so ECMAScript 7, what exactly is that? So that is nothing but the JavaScript version. So whatever the JavaScript we use, JavaScript version will be decided based on ECMAScript 7, 8, 9. So every year, so the versions will be released. In short, we call as ES7. Okay, so by default, the modern web stack supports ES7, right? ECMAScript 7. That is nothing but the JavaScript version. Okay, and here maybe the rendering means how the page we see whenever we open any website, how the page is opened. So that process we call as rendering, already as part of the Visual Force and Aura, same concept. So the new thing what we are seeing here is the modules, one of the concept. So here, wherever we hear about module, in a simple way to understand, so think that module is a smaller JavaScript file. Module is like one of the JavaScript file. Okay, so frequently we refer modules. So if somewhere, wherever you see, wherever someone mentioned module, just understand module is a JavaScript file which is having some logic. Okay, so maybe let me show you this one. If you see, previously as part of the Aura, maybe other frameworks, to include the framework, the entire framework file, if you include, and on top of that, if our component needs to run. So every time when you try to open the application in a new browser, system will internally in the background try to download the framework file, and on top of that, our components will run. So instead of every time referring the huge framework file, using modules concept, so the functionality is maintained in separate small files, and while working, so what we need out of the entire framework, only those things we refer, and the system will scan only that code and execute. That way the performance will be more, so faster performance. So that's why this module concept is introduced in LWC. Okay, so when we start working, you will understand. For now, just terminology wise, just understand that module is one of the small JavaScript file. Okay, and also one of the terminology which we see, directive. Okay, so when we deal with the LWC components, people say directive. Right? Directive is nothing but so maybe let me write the notes here. In general, either in Visual Force or maybe in ARA, if you want to refer any dynamic value, so we use this expression, right? Some variable, whatever the variable you want to refer, we refer like that. So same thing for either Visual Force or ARA, same process. Okay, but when we deal with the LWC Lightning Web Components, to refer, so to refer dynamically. Okay, so basically we refer the JavaScript variables, JavaScript properties. To refer, we use like this. Okay, there is no implementation. Okay, so this whatever we use technically we call as directive. Okay, so this part people call as directive. Right here we just refer some JavaScript variable. Right, JavaScript variable we refer, and this expression technically people refer as directive. Okay, just get to know the terminology so that when we write, you can understand. Or if someone say directive, we should know about that. Okay, so and also when we deal with the LWC, we hear about decorator. Okay, so for us to understand easily, decorator is like a annotation in Apex. In Apex, we have many annotations: @future, @is right? So @future means after that, whatever you refer, that method will execute in the future context. After @is test, if you write a class, that class system knows that it is a test class. In the same way, instead of annotation, here technically we call as decorator. So decorators also will change the behavior of the JavaScript elements, whatever we use based on the decorator, the meaning of the JavaScript functions or the right, so the variables, those will be changed. Okay, so for us, since already we know about annotation, so understand that a decorator is like an annotation for a special behavior. To apply it before the variable or method, we use this decorator. Okay, and also you might be also hear about a concept called shadow DOM. Okay, so this shadow DOM, for this, from our side, no need to do anything. Okay, it's a internal concept. So in general, what happens when we have a parent component? Let's say assume that we have a parent component, and assume that we have a child component. So what will happen if you apply any styles for the parent component? Automatically, those styles will be applied to child. Suppose say I don't want to apply the parent component styles into child. If I apply some styles in the child component, system should take care of applying the styles which are included in the child component without overriding with the parent component styles. Okay, so those things are taken care. Okay, so by the framework when we deal with the LWC, so that concept we call as shadow DOM. For that, from our side, no need to do anything. The system will take care of that concept. Okay, and also maybe I'm highlighting the most important parts when we deal. Okay, and also when we deal with the LWC, we see a concept called template. Okay, so template is nothing but the reusable UI file. right? It's like HTML file. The HTML file which we can reuse through JavaScript. Okay, so maybe when we create the LWC, that time you will understand. So we can dynamically control which UI file you want to refer through the JavaScript file in the bundle. I think once we start creating, you will understand. For now, to understand template is a HTML file, so which will show the UI when we develop the Lightning Web component. Okay, so just understand that. And the next terminology, slot. Okay, so slot means maybe if you attended ARA, so we have component composition in ARA. So that means from parent component, we can supply the UI snippet into child component. So that we call as the slot. Okay, so slot means from parent UI markup can be embedded into child component. So such kind of process we call as slot. Using slot we can do that. Okay, when I take the example, you will understand. So in general, if you have parent and if you have child, right? When you are referring a child component, let's say we are dealing with the ARA. In ARA, or maybe if you know about Visual Force component. So while referring component, so how we supply the values to the child component, there are some attributes, right? Through attributes, we supply some values into the child component. So we can only supply the values. But let's say I want to supply the UI markup into child component, right? So maybe in between whatever UI markup I keep, that should be embedded into child. So that kind of things are possible using a slot concept in LWC. Okay, so I think just I recommend you to just get to know at this point of time. When I take the example, that time you will get the clear picture. Okay, so that's the slot. So one of the next terminology, so Lightning Web component. So similar to ARA component, here in Lightning Web component, system generates a bundle of by default 3 files: HTML, JavaScript, and XML. 3 files will be generated whenever we create the Lightning Web component. So we'll be creating in few minutes. I'll show you how that bundle looks and what's the purpose of each and every file. Okay, so before we do that, so one of the final thing what we need to know before we work, the JavaScript what we use in LWC. So the JavaScript from ES6 version, right? ECMAScript 6. There are many huge changes introduced by JavaScript. Okay, so here when you deal with the LWC, we follow JavaScript ES6 classes. Okay, so there are ES6 classes from JavaScript. We use that style of syntax to develop the JavaScript and maintain our logic. Okay, it's like a latest style of organizing the JavaScript code and so calling and all those things. Okay, so for us to know about that, I think some of you, if you are new, I think already we discussed JavaScript basics. So just let me give one example. Okay, so maybe I'm going to create one file here. So let me create one HTML file and just for our purpose to see how the JavaScript class we can create and how we can understand the syntax. Okay, quickly, I'll highlight the syntax of that. So for that, I need one HTML file. Simply, I'm going to maybe desktop. I'm just creating one HTML file. So just HTML. Okay, so maybe I'm just taking body. So here I'm going to keep the JavaScript. Okay, so maybe somewhere, maybe let me just keep the JavaScript here. For now, I'm directly writing inside this. You can also keep the JavaScript in a separate file and refer. This is just to show you how the JavaScript class we can create and use. Okay, so to create the JavaScript class and the name of the class, and maybe you might be familiar with Apex, how we do. When we compare with Apex, I think easily you can connect. Okay, so in general in Apex, so how we create the class, we say public class name, right? So let's say here some name, let's say account class. This is the way we write. Sorry, this is the way we write in the Apex. And so, but here we don't use any access modifier. Okay, so basically it uses the class and object kind of structure, but we can say it is not the pure object oriented programming concept. Okay, so partial object oriented programming concepts. Okay, so here we don't use any access modifiers like private or public. Okay, so class and the name of the class, and maybe in Apex to write the constructor name should be same as the class name. So, but here in the JavaScript, the constructor name should be constructor only, right? We say constructor and we write some logic, right? So this is the way we do. Okay, so let's say for now I'm printing, right? This is constructor. Okay, I'll show you when exactly it will invoke. This is the constructor syntax. In Apex, it is completely different. And also here, if you want to define a method, okay, so let's say I want to deposit some amount. Okay, so if you want to define a method, here we don't mention any access modifier, we don't mention any return type. Okay, let's say I'll say deposit is the method name. Okay, if you don't use return statement, it is like a void method. If you keep the return statement, it is like a method which is returning some value. Okay, because in JavaScript, so if you know some basics, okay, so we don't really mention the data type, right? Automatically based on the values what we deal, JavaScript can detect the data type automatically. Okay, so here that's why we don't mention any return type. So really, if you want to return something, we say return some value. But for now, I don't know what to return. I'm just giving null. Okay, so maybe I want one variable to maintain at class level to access, right? So here, for that, what we do, so we define like this. Okay, so here, maybe I want to keep the default balance as 5,000. So it's like that. Okay, this is the way how we define. No need to mention any data type. And also, we know when we define some of the JavaScript variable, we use var, constant, let. inside the class, we should not use like that. Directly inside this class, when you are defining any variable. So technically, as per ES6 standard, we call this as a property, right? So properties, variable or property, people say property means that is nothing but a variable. So we should not mention either where or constant or let. Okay, make sure to remember that. So just define variable, and if you want to assign some value, you can assign. And also, whatever the variables we define at this level, to refer, for sure, we have to use a keyword called this. So without that, it is not possible to access. Okay, so must and should 100%. We have to make use of the this keyword and access the property. Right? Property means the variable. So this is the way. Okay. So anyway, now here, so deposit means we have to take some input, right? So input. So here we don't mention any data type, right? So amount, right? So we are expecting a number. So as soon as they supply the number as input, so what I'm going to do? So this dot balance the variable which is at class level to that we are adding, right? So plus is equal to, for that I'm just adding this amount whatever supplied. Okay. So and after adding balance with this method is returning. So this is the way how we define a method and return the values when we deal with the JavaScript. Okay, in the same way with the, and if I want to have one more method, so I'll just say withdraw and subtract and return. Okay, so this is the way. So at high level, this is how we define the class. Now, how to call this, right? Now, nothing will happen when you keep this like this, right? So this is a class. Class is like a plan. Unless we call that with the object, it is not going to execute. Okay. So now maybe let me open this HTML. I'm opening this HTML file in the browser. Okay, so here mostly I'm printing the information in the JavaScript log, right? So in the log I am going to print this information. So where to see the log after opening the page? So when you right click and inspect, right, click on console. Here, whatever the console logs I'm printing, console.log is like system.debug. In JavaScript, we use console.log. Okay, so it will print this information when we open the page in the console. It will print. Yeah, mostly I'll show you by printing. But after, whenever I open this page, nothing is printed because we created, but we have to call this. To call this one, okay, so I'm just creating an instance, new account. Right? This is the way how we have to call. Okay, and then maybe I want to store this in one of the variable. You can say where and account like this. Okay, but when we define a variable in the JavaScript, we use where or let or constant. Okay, so here to understand at high level, where is global scope, right? Where it will be having the global scope. That means, so once you define, this will be available everywhere. So let's say even though I define this inside this class, outside also that will be accessed. Right? Globally it will be available. Okay, so if you don't want to make your variable globally available, similar to our Apex class, right? In Apex class, all our variables are block scoped, right? So that means within this block, if I write the variable, this is accessible only inside that, right? Inside that, or when you create the instance. So it's not global. If you want like that, we deal with the let, right? So let is block scope. Okay, in whichever the block we define, only that variable will be available within that block. So that is let. Okay, so similar to let, we have constant, which is also block scope, but read only. That means only one time we can assign the value. At the time of defining, right? At the time of defining the constant type variable, so we have to assign some value, and there is no way to change that value. So that is constant, which is also block scope. Okay, these are few basics to understand. So now, so most of the times we deal with the block scope, and wherever if you don't have a situation to modify, right? Let means it is block scope, and it can be read write. Means you can assign and you can modify the value any number of times. Okay, so that is let. Okay, so let's say here I am creating the object for this ES6 class, and this one we say this ES6 ECMAScript 6, right, class, and I don't want to modify that, right? Just I don't have any requirement to modify, so that's why I'm assigning to a variable, and I'm marking that one as constant because I don't have a requirement to modify that. Yeah, so this instance I'm storing into this variable. Now due to this line, what will happen? So when page loads, this will be executed. When this is executed, it creates the instance of this class. So this is like we are invoking this constructor. You will see this is constructor. Due to this line, you will see system is printing this is constructor in the console. Okay, maybe save this and just let me refresh. So now here, I think I did not save it. Okay, so now just refresh. Okay, so I'm not seeing that it's printed. So new account, as soon as this statement is executed, this should be called. Okay, so this is the instance.
Constructor spelling.
Yeah, constructor spelling is wrong, so that's a problem. Okay, now let's go back. Just refresh now. If you see it is printing, this is constructor, right? So that means it is entered here. Now after that, I want to call maybe one of the method, and whatever it returns, I want to print. So what you can do, I can say account dot deposit. Maybe I want to deposit 3000. Okay, after we call this, it is returning the balance. Okay? So that balance I want to print in the log. Okay, all I am doing console.log, and I am printing in the log. Right? So maybe while printing, I want to know. So what is the value I am printing? I'm just giving in a single quote, or you can also use double quote. I'm saying balance after deposit And here, if you see, I'm appending that result, whatever it returns, that I'm appending. Now, if you save and just come back and refresh, see balance after deposit 8,000, right? So it is working. And also, I want to call the withdraw and the see, right? So balance after withdrawn, I'll say withdraw. I'm withdrawing 1,000. Okay, and also one of the modern way to maintain the string values. In general, in the JavaScript, we have a string. For the string, if you want to concatenate with the sum of the dynamic value, we use plus operator and concatenate. So in modern JavaScript, so we have a approach called right. So template text. Okay, so template text how we define. So without using the plus symbols and having the headache. So what we do, instead of enclosing the string in single quotes and combining with plus operator, so here we use backtick. Okay, backtick you can find under our escape key. Okay, so this is not single quote. Okay, this is a backtick. So we keep inside that. Okay, now inside that we don't use any plus symbols. So whatever the string is there, directly we refer the string. And wherever the dynamic value is there, the dynamic value, we just give dollar and enclose that dynamic value inside the floor brackets. So this is the way. Okay. With this way, if you have multiple, so even there you can also give line break and all those things will be, system will take it. Okay. This is more useful. So for this, I'm just keeping. Okay. So now save, and now if you see, we'll see balance after withdrawn, right? From 8,000, 1,000 is withdrawn, 7,000 it is given. Yeah, this is the way how we deal with the JavaScript. Just I'm giving one of the basic example how we really deal. Okay, so that when we start creating, you can easily understand how it works. Just I'm keeping in the notes here. Yeah, so that's about this. And the next thing before we start creating, so just now we discussed this kind of JavaScript example. Few points before we start creating. So LWC. So when you say you have experience with Lightning Web Components, we should know LWC for now in an official way, it can be created only from the Visual Studio Code, directly from the developer console. Let's say from browser setup or from the developer console, it is not possible to create the Lightning Web Component in an official way. Okay, so officially to create, we have to create using the Visual Studio Code. So just understand that point. So apart from that, the thing is nowadays there are some Chrome plugins. Okay, so if you are using a Chrome browser, when you log into Salesforce, if you don't want to use Visual Studio Code, there is a plugin called Salesforce Advanced Code Etcher. Okay, so somehow some of you, if you are not comfortable with the Visual Studio Code, the alternative is installing this Chrome plugin. Once you log into Salesforce, you see like this. So click on LWC editor. So maybe one time you need to authorize, right? One time you need to click on this one, and so I have to say authorize, and you need to log into the account. so that next time onwards easily directly from the browser. First time we have to say hello, and in few seconds it will redirect, and directly from the browser you can create the Lightning Web component. But it is not official, right? This is some third-party plugin provided by some third-party company, not from the Salesforce. Okay, but still I see people struggling, not able to use Visual Studio Code, maybe due to some reason, maybe it is not installed quickly. If you want to work, the solution is I recommend you to install this plugin, and from here you can create, and it is also easy to start with. Okay, so just understand this. Okay, so maybe to show you, I'm just clicking on create a new component here. So you can also find some advanced options. So where exactly target means where you want to include this, all those things. Maybe I don't want to create from here. We go with the official way. Maybe here few things in a shortcut way you can see. Maybe to show you, sometimes I'll open this and show you. Okay, so this is one thing, just understand. The official way is using VS Code. Maybe if you don't know how to install VS Code and the procedure, I'll share one PDF document with you. You can install and make your Visual Studio Code ready for the development. Okay, so let's say I believe most of you are using VS Code and you know how to use. So now let's first create our first Lightning Web component. So before we create, one more point. In general, the naming convention. So what is the naming convention we use while creating the Lightning Web component? We use camel case. We follow the camel case naming convention, right? Camel case means starts with a small letter, and after that each and every word will be a capital letter. Okay, so that convention we follow. Strictly, I recommend you to follow that. Okay, the reason is, so what will happen once we create some Lightning Web components? So let's say our component name is my first component. If you are referring this component in some other Lightning Web component as a child, so how we refer this? So while referring, okay, maybe in ARA, how we refer ARA or LW, sorry, maybe ARA and Visual Force to refer, we use C colon, the name of the component, like this. Okay, but here in LWC, how we refer, the default namespace is C. We give hyphen instead of colon. So my, and wherever the capital letter is there, instead of capital letter, we use hyphen first. After that, C, capital C is there, hyphen component. Okay, so this is the way we refer. And also, for sure, when we deal with the LWC, when you refer the component, it should have the starting tag and the ending tag separately. It is not possible to end like this. Okay, so make sure to have a starting tag and the ending tag separately. And this is how we refer, right? Inside, referring inside LWC component. While referring, this is the way we follow for the component. So that's why it's better to follow the camel case convention. Okay, so that's about that. And anyway, once we create the bundle, you'll see 3 files. I'll explain what is the purpose of each and every file. Okay, so now I'm going to explain these concepts by taking some examples. So while achieving those examples, I'll also cover the concepts. Okay. So we create a meaningful component, and in that process, we cover all concepts, what we need to know as part of the LWC. So I'm going to create one component with the name contact info. Let's say there is a contact, first name, last name, email, and some of the information we need to show on the UI. So how we show and what is the procedure. So I'm following the camel case convention here, starting with the small letter info. So I'm giving capital letter. Let's create the component. So for that, in VS Code, once you create the project, already I also created the project. I believe all of you know how you can create a project in the Visual Studio Code. In case if you don't know, just ping me. I will share a document with all the instructions how we can create the project and the team. Okay. Already I have the project, and I am creating one of the Lightning Web component. So we are going to use the command palette. Press F1. So once we have a project and you open VS Code, press F1, and you will see search for LWC. Now if you see there is a command, and maybe we are not writing commands, we are using the command palette. So create Lightning Web component. We need to choose this one and give the component name. I'm giving the component name as contact info. This is the component name, and give everything default, and so that's it. We created our first Lightning Web component. Okay, so this is the Lightning Web component. This is the key file, right? Out of these three files, the key most important file is the JavaScript file, right? Maybe in the bundle, so template, right? This one we call as template, contact info.html file. Here we write the UI. So the thing is, the template we can control dynamically. So maybe we can have multiple HTML file and decide which one you want to render through JavaScript. Okay, so everything is controlled through JavaScript here, right? So that's the thing. So we have to know this is the key file. Maybe there is a possibility you can create multiple HTML files and decide which one you want to render while component is loading. So that is it. Okay. So but in general,
just one question. In that case, if I have multiple HTML file, name would be different, right? For that HTML file, and will not match with LWC.
Name can be different. Name should be different, right?
Okay.
Within the same folder. We decide. Maybe this is the standard HTML generated along with the bundle.
Yeah, just going forward, just take one example of that. That would be helpful and easy to understand.
We have examples. Just
okay. Yeah.
Concept, right? So for each and everything, we will be discussing with an example. Okay. So now, and also as a default in the bundle, it generated three files. So one is the HTML file, right? Template within this reusable HTML logic we keep. And one is the JavaScript. Here we write all the JavaScript. And the one is the XML file. This decides where you want to allow this component to be used. Do you want to allow this component in the app builder? Do you want to allow this component as a quick action? Do you want to allow this as a tab? All those things we decide here in the XML file. Maybe in Ara, we define some interfaces, but here we control using the XML. And also, so what we should know, these are by default generated. So based on the need, you can also create the CSS file. Okay, so if you go back to this, if you see here in this screen, there are also If you want to include, you can include CSS file and the SVG file. So along with these 3 files which are generated by default, you can manually right click and the new file. In case if you want CSS file, you can also create a CSS file, info.css. If you want SVG file, again, give the same name, contact info, whatever the component name is there, that name dot SVG. So those 2 files additionally, based on the requirement, we can create. Okay, it's not that only the 3 files, whatever system generates, those are ultimate. Okay, and also if needed, you can also create a subfolder and then include files and can also refer that. All those things are possible here. Okay, so just get to know now out of these files. So first let me explain about the JavaScript file, which is most important. So now when we created this component, all this is generated automatically, right? So what is the meaning of this one? Okay, so in JavaScript, so ES6 version, from ES6 version in JavaScript, there is a concept called modules. Already I told module is a reusable JavaScript file, right? Small JavaScript file. So when you have multiple JavaScript files, from one JavaScript file, if you want to refer the other JavaScript file logic, so that time we import, and also in order to import the other JavaScript file should allow export. So for example, let's assume that maybe in the notes, let's assume that we have 2 JavaScript files, okay, for our understanding. So let's say we have import dot, right, JavaScript file format is .js, means JavaScript. So we have import .js and also we have export .js. Okay, let's say we have 2 JavaScript files. Okay, so here in JavaScript, in export.js JavaScript file, there is some logic. I want to import that logic in the import.js file. Okay, so what we have to do, it's not that when you write some logic by default that can be allowed to import. Right? Let's say here I'm defining constant balance is equal to something like this and giving, right? So maybe I want to allow to modify this balance. Let's say this I cannot access from import.js. Okay, so if you define any property or any method, let's say there is a method. Okay, for example, we have a method called deposit. So this one I want to use in this JS file. By default, it is not possible to refer. Okay, so maybe a more. So here, so maybe let's say this is a class, maybe outside. For now, maybe some logic, just think that. Okay, now if I want to call this one, import into this file, this property should be marked as export. Okay, so export. So when this is marked, then from here we can import, right? So from here in this file, how we can import? You can say import. So actually, so while exporting, there are 2 types of exports. Okay, if you give some named export, means so this variable is having some name, right? Balance, right? So this we call as named export. Okay, this is also, this method is also having some name. This also while exporting, if you say like this, this is also named export. We also have default export. Okay, so that won't be having any name. For example, we say export. Our method is not having any logic. Without that, also we can define. Let's say I'm defining one of the anonymous function JavaScript. Okay, so some logic I wrote. If you see, this function is not having any name, right? So these kind of things, if you want to export the function which is not having any name, we mark that one as default. Okay, so this we call as default export. Okay, so we have named export, we have the default export. When you mark like this in the other JavaScript file while importing, to import any named exports, the properties or methods which are marked as export, right, which is having some name, we have to for sure take the flower brackets, and inside that, and let's say I want to export balance from the location of that file, right, where that is there, the file. If it is in the same folder, so we queue like this, and we say export.js. Okay, anyway, we'll see in LWC the locations will be different. Okay, just I'm giving one example. In the same way, if you want to export this deposit, you can also export. Okay, that way you can use this variable, you can use this method inside this JS file. Okay, if you want to export this default one, default export one, the process is we use import and we don't use any flower brackets, right? So we just give some name. This is not having any name, right? We give our own name, whatever you want, right? So some method or whatever you want, give that name. It's in our hands. What is the name you want to give? And export. Right? Here we don't give any flower brackets. Only one default export we can include in one JavaScript file. And so same kind of concept is used when you create the LWC bundle. We see here, this is like import.js. Right? So here there is a module. Module is a JavaScript file, right? This is a Lightning Web Component core module. For sure, whenever we create any Lightning Web Component, from this LWC module, it's like a JavaScript file. From that, this is like a named export. In this module, they might be internally maintaining a class called Lightning Element. That class we are importing. Okay, and also here you know how to write the class and the class name. You know inheritance, right? In Apex, if you want to inherit one class from other class, we use extends. So whatever the component we are creating, so class and the component name becomes as a class name. This class for sure 90%. So most of the times whenever we create the Lightning Web Component, it should inherit from this Lightning element, which is base. Okay, so that is default. So we are inheriting this Lightning element. That's the meaning. But what is this? We are allowing this. It's like this class is not having any. So this one like a default export. We have here default export. So like this. So we are allowing this to export. Okay. I'm not storing this class in any variable, right? I'm not storing this class in any variable directly. So we are marking this one as the default export. This class can be imported in other class. This, okay, so we are making that possible. So in general, whenever you create any Lightning Web Component as a default, you see this structure generated by Salesforce. Okay, so now here we write the logic, and when you write the logic here, how this will be accessed from the UI, right? From here, all those things. I think since we don't have time, tomorrow we discuss how the communication happens from this UI to this JavaScript, and why we use this, and all these things mostly we cover tomorrow. If you see in this component, as part of this, we are going to cover so all these concepts. We have small concepts. So maybe for our demo, since I need to explain few advanced things, I'm taking this component and explain all those things. But again, once we start, we'll again deal with small things and also slowly understand the advanced things. Okay, so I think tomorrow is enough to achieve all these things. We'll focus on the development and we complete this tomorrow. So before ending today, any questions, anyone? Okay, so this notes I'll maybe send to your email. So maybe you can check and you can try to follow. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.